Thank you, thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Vicki. Vicki is a social entrepreneur teacher, founder of the Green Market in Santa Cruz from Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Amaral. There. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. It's absolutely an honor to be able to talk on this panel. And really, I just want to reflect together with you a little bit about what Silent Spring is and what advocacy really can mean. Next slide. Rachel Carson, when she wrote this book, Silent Spring, dedicated it to Albert Schweitzer. And you all would know who Albert Schweitzer is, a man of the last century and who spent a long time in Africa trying to work on people's health and the environment. And he said, and she quoted him in the beginning, "Man has lost the capacity to foresee and forestall. He will end by destroying the earth." And these are pictures that I took of bees in the market, and you can see how happy they are. And it's just an exciting thing to see them alive instead of dead, as we saw in so many of the other slides, right? So we want to keep them alive. Next slide, please. Now this is where I have the green market. And it's important for you to see this because when you see it, it just looks like a forest, correct? And this is where the 5 acres where we actually have the market. So the next slide, please. And that is underneath what you saw in the previous slide. And the whole point of the green market is to prove that commerce and community wealth is not dependent on concrete buildings and malls. That you can create wealth and you can create community wealth. You can create commerce, you can educate people in groups when they come together in this environment. And let me just add that the Japanese have done a great deal of research on what they call forest bathing. And it is true that old growth trees and forests, like the sea which produces ozone, produce chemicals which interact with human beings and help them to feel calm. And this is one of the reasons that making people, encouraging people to go out in nature is very important. Okay, so we're going to move quickly along, but this is just to situate where we do our work. Next slide, please. So, Amaral had asked me to speak about the advocacy campaign that we had in Trinidad. This campaign was in 2014. And let me back up a minute. Because in talking to you today, I need to say something that a friend told me. He said to me, tell the people that you're talking to that the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. And when he said that, I said, well, I have to remember to say that because when you think about our hearts as human beings and the fact that it pumps our blood and that we are filled with a certain love for ourselves, for the earth, for the creatures, for the mysteries, then it becomes important to remember that we can't see a lot of nature and it's very small, and bees are like that. We don't always see them. We don't see a lot of the insects and the other pollinators, the bats and the birds, the hummingbirds. They're tiny compared to us. And so we miss them when we're not paying attention. And so I just want to remind us to think about that again. The bees, it's 75 to 95% of all flowering plants everywhere in the world need bees for pollination. In the United States, bees are a $5.4 billion industry, and that's in the United States alone, if we look at the ecosystem services that the bees provide. So, in order to do what Martin and Larissa and Carlo are talking about as the individuals that you are sitting out in this audience today, you have to come together. And what we decided after talking to the beekeepers in Trinidad, who were suffering a great deal from imported honey coming into the country. So the imported honey, in many cases that's cheap, is also contaminated. And it comes in, and of course I learned in 2014 that bees actually like honey. I thought the bees were only making the honey for us, but I found out that bees actually like honey and they eat the honey themselves, and when they start to eat the honey and it's contaminated, they get sick and you get colony collapse and all of the other cascade of things from them bringing the chemicals, because I'm from a small Caribbean island country. So we import a lot of food, and in that food importation comes all of the things that Larissa talked about. When they ban the chemicals in Europe, they come into Trinidad and Tobago, they come into the Caribbean countries with labels, mind you, that are so tiny that you cannot read the instructions. So you never really know how to use these products when they come into our country. So, "Don't spray me, I am bee food" was our campaign. And we printed many of these, and they were hung on trees and plants so that people would remember not to spray the things that are bee food. And it was a very effective campaign. The story that I will tell you is of the manufacturers who were screaming about the lack of importation or the bans on importation. And when we explained to them what happened to the honey and the beekeepers, they had their aha moment, and then they became supporters. And this is what is the most important, that we look at some of the entrenched interests as our enemies, and somehow we have to work towards giving them the education that helps them to understand how to rethink what they are doing. Now, when Martin talks about these pesticides, I'm not a scientist, so I can't say, but I think many of these pesticides are synthetic, correct? Right, and people say ban the chemicals, but no, we are chemicals. We are all made of chemicals. So you see how when you're not precise in what your language is and what you're saying, that you make a mistake. I saw out in the garden there are marigolds. We plant marigolds everywhere in the green market. They're a natural pesticide. And so these are the kinds of things that we have to think about when we want to have our pollinators do the work that they can do for us. There's another thing in that foresee and forestall, and that's really what I wanted to talk to you about the most today, is that